You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello and welcome to TFM's local books and comic show, Literary Tracks, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rishi. So excited to have back with us the one and only, the fantastically brilliant Bruce Gibson.
I'm here. I'm just here.
I hear you. No, I get that completely. It's been a strange week since, as we're recording, my wife and I just got back from vacation, and so trying to get back into normal, first day of work, tons of catch up today, but we're going to be talking about some great stuff here in Literary Treks as we continue on with that 24th century series. I'm really excited. We finally reached another Titan book, Fallen Gods. But before we get into that, we've got some news to get into. And so, and actually, Bruce, before we do that, want to just say thank you for listening to Literary Tracks. And, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on every single platform out there. And, of course, if you're on Apple Podcasts, we'd love to have a review. It's been a really long time since Literary Tracks has had a new review. We'd appreciate that. It helps people find the show, of course. And make sure you're following us on Twitter at TrekFM or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. Members-only discussion group called the Babel Conference on Facebook. You can join and talk to listeners from all over the world about what's going on in here in the network, especially as we've got some great things coming up. We're revamping some stuff. We've got some surprises coming out for everyone soon, so I hope you'll be checking that out. Of course, you could send us an email if you'd like at trek.fm/contact. Just choose a show, choose Literary Tracks, and that comes to Bruce, Chris, and I. And also, you can also follow us over on Instagram at TrekFM as well. So all of those places, we'd love to interact with you and appreciate you doing that already if you are. Now, Bruce, this is the penultimate issue of Year 5 with issue 24. And honestly, this issue kind of puts a bow on everything, really. And so I'm going to be interested to see where they go, because we close out the story. Like, we end with what happens with Gary 7 and the Tholians. And then, it really does feel like an end here as Kirk and Spock walk off the bridge together. So, as we bring it to an end, I'm really interested to hear what you thought of the resolution, first with the story between Kirk and Gary 7, because in all honesty, I felt like that was the strongest part to me because it was so personal between Kirk and Gary 7, the conversation that they have.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. Going into this issue, knowing that there's a issue 25 that's going to be more of like a supersize issue, I wasn't necessarily expecting this to be resolved, this storyline to be resolved in this issue. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that. And it is good to see how really Kirk talks Gary 7 down in a sense. And that they have these parallel paths with each other, and how they address things in their lives, and that everything's about the mission. Kirk's pointing out, it's all with us. It's always about what our mission is. And the thing I liked about this storyline throughout all these issues with Gary 7, it was so unexpected on how they portrayed Gary 7 and doing his mission and the death of Isis. I mean, I was half expecting they'd find some way to bring Isis back at the end of this issue, and I'm glad they didn't go that route. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I thought what was really interesting is that how Kirk gets to Gary Seven, like what it is that he gets him with, which is the idea of, hey, I understand what you're going through. I understand who you are in many ways. You are the person who gave up everything for the mission. You gave up everything for this mission you believe in, and you have nobody now. You feel like you have nobody, because the only person you had was this one friend that you had made along the way, and that's gone for you now too. And Kirk feels that loss as well, because everybody that he knows is going their separate ways from the Enterprise. And he has this son that he'll never know. You know, he has this estranged love that he had, Carol Marcus, that, you know, really doesn't want him around. You know, he knows what it's like to kind of have given everything up for the mission, and not necessarily kind of be in a position where you don't really feel like you have much left. And I thought that was really introspective of Kirk, and I think it really plays into, you know, a lot of the struggles that you see with him, especially as you get into the movie era, and even kind of reminds me of some of the things to which he's going to talk about with Picard in Generations, you know, and to why he would choose Antonia in that. You know, what would lead him to, like, what did he get out of it all, right? And he, you know, talks about the idea of, you know, being the person who has their hands on the scales of like justice for the galaxy, and being a part of like moving the galaxy forward in a really clear way. And so, you know, I think it's such a good speech that Kirk gives, because it really is a kind of a great deconstruction of who that character is and what's, you know, happened to him. I thought that was really good.
It is good, but I wanted to reread it. I've only read it the one time, and I really wanted to go back and reread it, but I haven't had the chance to do that yet. But Gary's focus has been on stopping Kirk, even killing Kirk, to prevent all this destruction that could come to the universe because of Kirk's actions. Mm-hmm. And it all is this domino effect to all these other things are to come. So I get Kirk's speech, but to me, was that enough to prevent Gary from doing what he was doing to stop his mission?
You know, I think it's interesting because it is a good question. You know, is it enough? And I don't know. I don't really know if I have an answer to you and for you on that.
The only thing I can think is there's a line where Kirk says, and I'm looking through the issue now, says, "We'll face the future together." As if the future, in a lot of cases, has been written, but going forward in what would be Kirk's future, Gary Seven could be there with him, like they'll do it together. And mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm just struggling to put that all together as to mm-hmm. why that would bring Gary Seven down to say, I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, I think possibly what brings him down is that he feels understood, like he doesn't feel alone in the galaxy, like he feels like somebody gets him. And I think that kind of plays in with the same conversation that Spock and Kirk have on the bridge as they're, you know, wrapping up on the Enterprise and leaving. And that they are two people, you know, who do understand each other. You know, you even get hinted at that Spock realizes Kirk's not going to be riding a desk forever, you know, because that's not him. And Kirk trying to make the best of the situation, like, you know, talking about how it's not going to be that bad and all that kind of stuff. But I really got kind of reading between the lines with what Spock was saying, is I got the feeling like, you know, he understands his friend better than maybe his friend understands himself at this moment. And maybe that is why Gary 7 is able to let go is because somebody does get where he's coming from. You know, maybe even more so than ISIS, right? You know, he gets somebody who's like Kirk sees through him, and like maybe that's enough. But I do understand what you're saying. It almost feels like maybe there needed to be more there too. I like it a lot. I think it's a really great Kirk speech.
Yeah.
And mainly because of what it allows us to be introspective about Kirk. But I do think you have a really great point of, is that really enough for Gary 7, who has been so sold out to what he's doing all this whole time? And I mean, maybe it also comes down to that Gary no longer wants to be a pawn in somebody else's game, which Kirk kind of points to as well, you know, and pokes at. The whole idea of like trying to be the captain of your own ship, you know? And maybe he's just tired of being Aegis's pawn.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I do wonder, though, did Kirk also, in a way where... Okay, so let's talk about Gary 7 real quick. So when we see Gary 7 in, you know, TOS and some other things, Gary 7 is... I don't feel like he's trying to rewrite history. I feel like he's trying to prevent the destruction of the human race, or prevent the destruction of any other race. In this case, he's going back and trying to fix a timeline. And I've never really got the sense that he's the type of person that's going to go back and keep changing the timeline and hope that it works out in the end. And so maybe because Kirk is chasing him through the timeline and preventing him, he's wearing him down and saying, you know, I mean, he doesn't say this, but in a way, history has already been written, and we can't fix the past, and we can't fix your past to Gary, and we can't just stay on this mission of trying to fix everything, because it won't be, you know, it can't be fixed. You can't fill your loss by trying to correct the universe.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think, and what was fascinating, and it ties into what we see with Spock and the Tholians, is that this whole plan is actually going to be something that backfires, right? Because Spock has seen the end. Right. And I think that's the thing, is that Gary's plan is not going to bring about what he thinks it's going to bring about. And that's really interesting, that the character is fighting a losing battle in many ways. Like he's not even going to get what he thinks he wants, which is saving the universe, because the plan he's enacted with the Tholians is actually going to bring about the end of everything. And that's definitely not what he wants. And that's not going to make him feel fulfilled or happy, because he'll be dead. You know, like I think that's really interesting. So yeah, it's a really interesting issue, and it almost makes me feel as though I think the last two issues would have been better served almost to have the entire issue be about the resolution between Kirk and Gary 7, an entire issue, and then the other issue be an entire resolution between Spock and the group with the Tholians, and then what plays out in the Federation president battle. Because I feel like the Gary 7 part with Kirk just needed more page time, so you could really talk through all these issues.
Well, I know we're getting one more issue, but like I said, it seems to be more of a standalone from this storyline, and it's almost like we just needed just that one more issue to play out this storyline. Again, I'm as we're talking, I'm going back and rereading some things, but I do see Gary freaking out saying, you can't see past your own ambition. Everything can die as long as you keep that forsaken chair. I have nothing left. Don't you understand? I have nothing. What does Kirk being in that chair have to do with Gary? So all of a sudden, I think that's where it becomes personal. Like, Gary's not motivated necessarily by doing the right thing of, what he's going to do is to fix the universe. He doesn't know that. He's just taking his revenge out on Kirk. And I think that that speech is like just bringing him down to realize you're not doing this for the mission. You're doing this for yourself.
Yeah. I think you just hit on something right there that really is key to it, is that Kirk points out the selfish motivation to Gary 7, and that's what kind of finally maybe breaks him, is that he's not even fighting for the mission to which he said he's been a part of and fought for all this time. It has become about revenge. And, I think what makes this really interesting is that it is kind of a parallel then to Khan. And
I was thinking that too.
Would not be able to be talked out, but Gary 7 was, right?
Right.
So who is the superior intellect now?
Right. It's the wrath of Gary.
Exactly. So all in all, I mean, I think you're right in wanting kind of just maybe more on that, but I thought this was a good issue, and it brings together nicely the end of this whole run here with the Lost Years, and I'm quite interested to see where they go in that last issue, because this really does look like we're just going to be getting a final issue that's kind of a standalone that maybe bridges to the motion picture, I guess. That's kind of what it looks like a little bit. So,
but does it bridge to the theatrical cut or the director's cut?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't even answer that. I still don't even have my 4K new set yet because Amazon's back order, I guess, or whatever. It's a whole other story. But no, I don't know. I think it's interesting because yes, we bring this to a close, and so we've got one issue left, and I'm really going to be, I am wondering what they're going to do. But I think this was a good issue. And I think one of the things I have noticed, though, is that many times I find I like comics, and I always have, but sometimes I feel as though some of the stories they're trying to tell are so ambitious that I need more time with the stories. And so I appreciate their ambition, but a story like this, especially, I just felt like I needed more time.
The problem I feel I have with comics is I feel like I read them too fast. I don't stay on them long enough. That's why I was saying it would be good if I could read this issue one more time, because, it's a fast read, it's a quick read, and I need to sometimes just stop and take it in panel by panel a little more than just reading through it and like 15, 20 minutes later, whatever it takes, I'm done, because it just seems to go by so quick. But what I would love to do now that this series is ending is go back, and of course it would take me a long time to read them all, unless I do read them fairly quickly, but go through the whole series again, knowing where this is going.
Yeah, no, I think that would be something that would be really interesting to see how it all plays together. It's almost like when you watch a television show, and you kind of want to go back and binge it, basically.
Yes.
So that you can kind of pick up on all the things you might not have missed. So absolutely, I'm right there with you. So, well, really fun to get a chance to almost close out year 5, but I don't know about you, Bruce, but maybe we should go catch some fallen gods.
I mean, that's typically what someone does after they read a comic.
Well, Bruce, we are continuing on in our 24th Century series, and this is not a Typhon Pack series book, but it is the next book chronologically, and it is Titans Fallen Gods. And, this book honestly really does pick up right where we kind of left off with what happened with Andor and honestly, the political separation that has come, and the Andorian situation, and basically the fallout. Like, this whole book is dealing with that fallout. And I was really enjoying this whole side of the story, where we're dealing with what's going on with the Andorians, and the way in which the Andorians on Titan and throughout the Federation have been placed in this conundrum of being forced to choose between Andor and the Federation. And because the Andorian government has requested and called all Andorians to come home, basically to procreate because of the situation that they're in. And so arbitrarily, you've put this kind of political boundary and this cultural boundary between Andorians and the rest of the Federation, and it's not necessarily the most helpful thing for the Andorians and or the Federation, and so I really liked this whole part of the story. In fact, it was probably my favorite part of the story.
That's interesting. I would say that it is probably my favorite part of the story, too. I find the Andorians to be very interesting as a species and as a community, government, so on and so forth. And here are the Andorians, who are part of the Federation and who are a founding member of the Federation. And they've been this member for 2 centuries. And now that they leave the Federation, they want all the Andorians to come home, like you said, for the reasons said. But what I really enjoyed about this is not all the Andorians want to go home, especially the ones that are part of the crew of the Titan. And Riker gives them the option. He says, you tell me what you want. You're welcome to stay, but, Starfleet's going to send a ship to come get you and take you home. But if you want to go home, you can go home. And they all elect to stay because they don't view themselves as just being Andorians. They view themselves as being Starfleet. Right. They have their own mission. And I really like that. I really like that story.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that makes it so interesting is, and honestly, we get Pava talking about this specifically, this idea of, that literally overnight there have been these arbitrary political boundaries that have been set between the Andorians, especially those that are a part of the Federation and in Starfleet, and themselves. And by singling out a people only to be one thing, like that you're only Andorian, but that you're not all of these other things, right? And so I thought it was fascinating to see this political separation happen, and it was so timely that we would only see people as one thing, that we would make one thing about them the overarching thing about them. It's the thing that gives them complete definition, as if they're not a holistic person, that they're only Andorians, that they aren't, also engineers or parents or, all of these other things that they would be in their lives, that they would only be defined by one thing in their life here, and that creates this arbitrary boundary between them and everyone else. It was so timely, because I see that happen all the time these days, where we just start to look at people as only one thing, and instead of holistic beings that they are, and the multitude of things to which somebody is, and that how damaging that is. And we see that play out in these Andorian characters on Titan, who they love their jobs on the Titan. They've worked hard for their jobs on the Titan. They've worked hard for Starfleet. For them, their identity is not just that they're Andorians, but they're also Federation citizens. That they're also, all the positions that they hold, the jobs that they do, the relationships they have beyond just their Andorian relationships. And so I really appreciated this on the book, and in all honesty, I wish it might have been even deeper in the story, even more pronounced in the story. And he had even more focus on this than anything else, because I felt like this was really the quintessential essence of what this story needed to do, not only for the greater whole, but to really get to kind of like zero in and focus on one ship and the Andorian members of that crew facing the aftermath and the fallout of what happened in the previous book. It was really good.
I would have liked to have seen more of this, of the Andorian situation in this book, but I think that it was not focused on as much, probably because we're going to get more of it in later books. And so I think they're probably reserving some of it for that. But yeah, I mean, you said exactly what I was going to say. And that is, you know, they want to be there. That's their place. They made a decision in their lives to pursue this career, and they're doing what they love. And they don't want to be pulled away from what they love to do and what they've worked so hard to do just because they're an Andorian. Like, that's the only reason they have to take a lesser job or go back home, is because of their race. I mean, no, it's like, to your point, there's so many levels to people. They're more than just a race. They're more than just a species. They are an individual that, like you said, they're an engineer. They may be a wife. They may be, you know, the child of somebody. They may be a magician or a musician or whatever it is. Like, there's so many aspects to people.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to be pulled away from my family because I'm not originally from the state that I live in now. I mean, that's like how ridiculous it would be.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And what it plays into is this idea of what fear is making people do, and or what fear can cause people to do, because nobody's making anyone do anything, but fear has really creeped in. And fear is a part of the story, because, you know, we even have allusions to, like, all the way back to what happened in World War II with the Japanese internment camps. But we also think about the fear that the Dominion caused for the Federation during the Dominion War. And then, of course, with the Borg. And now with this whole issue here with the Typhon Pact. And that the Federation has had a really rough time in the sense that they have so many things that have been kind of chipping away at their values and making it difficult to live out those values to their fullest extent in the way we would think the Federation would, really putting them to a test. And the Federation is fearful now because of the Andorians, because of the connection that the Tholians have with that situation, and of course them with the Typhon Pact. And they've sown this fear so deeply, and it's causing, you know, the Federation to kind of act in ways that it wouldn't. But it's also because of the broken trust that's happened between Andoria and the Federation, both ways. And, you know, this whole idea that, Starfleet would be sending the Andorians to reassign them to less sensitive posts because they're not sure who they can trust. And so there's just fear that's permeating the alpha and beta quadrants right now. And it's interesting that this book really is playing that out. And I think this whole, because of this, the situation is so much tied to the Andorian situation. I just honestly wish the whole book really had been about this more than anything else in the book, because a lot of the rest of the story I didn't connect with as much, but this I just thought was great.
I like the rest of the story, but yeah, this is my favorite aspect of the whole book, though. Yeah, the whole idea of fear, it's just, and it hasn't been addressed in this book, and I can't recall if it is in others. I don't think it is, but I would think that the Federation would have this fear that they've lost Andor, that Andor has left the Federation, and this could lead to others leaving. And the Federation could just dissolve and go away. And the whole universe could look totally different. Well, maybe not the whole universe. The Alpha Quadrant, for the most part, could look totally different. But even, again, that creates that fear. And who do you trust? Like you said, it's like, you have Andorian officers, and you would think that you can trust them because they're not part of this political movement. You know, this
Right.
is something politicians are doing. These are crew members on the ship that have nothing to do with politics. So they're out of this. But then it's like, but are they loyal to the political decisions of their people?
Right,
And if there's
right.
the loyalty there, how do we know we can trust them? How do we know that
Right.
they're not going to do something to affect a mission in a negative way? And I mean, it's like, in some ways you can't blame the Federation at the same time. It's like, you know, but you got to be careful. But I think Riker had the right move. You know, Riker, give him the chance to talk to his officers and figure out if they're in or out, if they're loyal or not, if they're trustworthy or not, instead of just sending a ship and saying, nope,
Sure.
we're going to send them all back to Earth or whatever and have them, you know, work on replicators for fresher bananas.
Well, I think, you know, part of that fear and fear taking over is that trust goes both ways. And so if the Andorian officers were to say, yes, I'm a Federation citizen, I am a Starfleet officer, and I wish to continue to serve in you know, that capacity, why wouldn't we give them the benefit of the doubt when their records and who they are and everything they've been through shows them to be people that we should be able to trust? You know, and I think it's interesting to see the Federation immediately jump to, oh, the Andorians, we can't trust them. And especially since, like you said, you know, Riker, you know, just give them the choice. You can go home or you can stay. Either one is okay with us. We understand whatever choice you make. You know, I was, and I understand why the Federation is making this choice. But I also understand, you know, why Riker is making the choice that he is then, because he's not going to be driven by fear. You know, he's not going to be driven to do something that he sees to be against the very principles of the Federation. And I don't know. It's just, the whole situation is wonderfully complicated in the best of ways, you know, for Star Trek. And again, this part of the story, I was really gravitating towards and loving.
And you can't blame the Andorians, really. I mean, the Federation should look at it and say, you know, we did wrong. We lost the trust of the Andorians. So why don't you trust Andorians when you're the one who's really at fault for what happened? That's what I don't really understand. But to your point, you know,
that's
there's
a
many
great
people,
point, Bruce.
You know?
Wow, that's absolutely. The Federation, you kind of brought this on yourself. Why are you the ones who are mistrusting the Andorians, especially when they have every reason to be the ones mistrusting you?
And maybe that's the whole reason. They're like, well, I don't know if those Andorian officers can trust us. And if they can't trust us, we can't trust them.
So it's this whole game of like, who trusts who? And instead of erring on the side of trust, we're going to err on the side of mistrust.
Right.
Immediately. Like, without any provocation to do so. Right? You know, it's not as though the Andorian officers have given any reason for them to not be mistrusted, especially since they are just being given the choice to leave if they so choose. So, I'm right there with you. Obviously, it's interesting to watch, and I think that's the whole point here is to be able to play out, you know, things not going perfectly. And that's the whole point of Star Trek, is to really help us to kind of work through issues through these mediums. And so,
isn't that the whole point of this book?
Yeah.
The whole theme of it is mistrust. I mean, as we go through the rest of this, we're going to bring that up several times. Yeah,
100%. Well, and we get to the planet here, Taeth, and we have the preservationists and the deconstructors, and honestly, kind of, Ryan, I'm rereading the first Foundation series book, and it reminded me much of that, because this is a planet to which is connected to the Brahma Shiva that we met in the previous book with Titan and Seize the Fire, and those people who built that they had an impact on this planet by creating the technology to save it from the supernova that had happened on the sun in this system. And it's been there for so long that the people have kind of forgotten the past. They have forgotten the science that led them there, and they see the science now as magic, and that magic has led to this religion, and there's this whole back and forth between the two characters. And I'm really wondering how you felt about this part of the story.
It was not my favorite part of the story. It wasn't that I didn't like it. I somewhat enjoyed aspects of it because of these two sides where one seems to be more of the progressives that, maybe that's not the right word, but we're back to that trust and mistrust. One trusts the technology or these fallen gods or whatever to keep their planet in order, and the others don't. They don't have the trust, and they want to take it over and stop it and tear it down. I mean, in some ways, the parallels kind of remind me of, people who talking about climate change or anything else, that is going on in our current environment today of, those who believe we should do this to protect the planet and those who feel like, well, we don't have to do anything or whatever it is. So, I mean, the fact that they are not a warp-capable society, I kind of enjoyed that they're kind of like, I don't know. They're just different. I can't. They had stocks and stuff like that or whatever.
Well, right. And it's interesting because they are a society to which is come from a society that had technology comparable with warp type technology.
Right.
And yet they've completely kind of abandoned it because they've forgotten it, basically. And I think you're right in calling out the idea that, like, this is trying to play with the whole ideas of those that might kind of be against ideas for tradition or, see them as some sort of heresy, theologically. I think the thing that I really struggled with, which is it's not a terrible idea, but I honestly found it kind of offensive because it's so cheapened. Like, there's no nuance to any of these sides. It's very just kind of black and white for this. And in all honesty, it really had nothing to do with the story.
I was just going to say,
it doesn't do anything for the story. So not
it feels
only
more
is
like it's a setup. Mm-hmm. It just sets up the story.
Yep. And there's really, because there's no nuance to it, and because it really doesn't feel important really to the story in and of itself, it just really bothered me. Like, I would much rather see more nuance in these type of stories. And that's where I think, like, Deep Space Nine, when it dealt with these type of issues, did so well, because you would deal with the Bajorans and someone like Kira with a lot of nuance when it came to, like, people of faith. And this just felt like a reversion to a more TOS kind of version. Like, there's clearly one side that's right, there's clearly one side that's wrong, and it just makes the people who are on the quote-unquote the wrong side look completely stupid. And I don't like that. I want more nuance, especially from this type of Star Trek. I think by this point, we'd already seen it done really well, and again, like in a Deep Space Nine. And so, it was, this book, just as a reading standpoint, it's really confusing because, one, you have all the Andorian names, which, can you stop just writing the full Andorian names and call them their short name? It's like, write it once and then call them their short name, because reading those names over and over again gets really confusing. So writers don't do that anymore. And I guess it doesn't even matter because the lit verse is about to go kaput anyway. So, but two, the same thing happened with this planet, Teeth, because we kept having these, like, they made up pronouns for them because you could tell they're a species that's probably more of an insectoid type species. And so they don't have, the same type of course, male, female, which I get all that. I think it's interesting to like play with those type of species, but it's just more confusing when you're reading it than helpful. So that was something that really bothered me about this part of the story as well. Not that the creativity, which is very creative, and I think it's really interesting. Obviously, Enterprise let us really explore, different societies, like the insectoids and those kind of things, which I think is really cool. But it for reading purposes, it just made it confusing.
I can see some of that. It didn't bother me as much as it bothered you. Only because, like you said, it didn't really wasn't that important to the story. As I said earlier, it does feel like it was more of like a setup to the situation to play out the story that really involves more of 116 and Tuvok and White Blue, which we're going to get into later. I feel like it sets up that storyline, which I would say is probably more of the A storyline, and the Andorian situation is the B. And this group, these people on this planet, they just fell to the background. Like they just didn't have any importance anymore. So
and there's no payoff for them in the end either.
No.
Like, we created this story, and then we're in this story, and then there's absolutely no payoff to them whatsoever.
And I didn't even think about that until you were talking, because as you were talking through it, I was like, wait, what was the payoff? What happens later with them? I don't think that was ever addressed. So, they
It's
just kind of felt it's almost as if, Michael Martin just had this idea, and then he just kind of moved away from it, and then just let it go.
Right. Well, like you said, it's more of a plot contrivance because we need to care about saving the planet, but there's not enough investment in the end because there's no follow through with that part of the story. So it's one of those places where you're just like, okay, we spent that time in those chapters, and it just felt more like padding for the book than actual importance for the book. It honestly, I feel like almost would have been better if the people on the planet that they find out that there's a civilization there, but these people have no idea about it. And so we wouldn't have had to spend so much time with them. I think that would have been much stronger storyline to just have, the crew of the Titan trying to do this in a way that won't destroy the Prime Directive, but also saves them. Or just at least we don't even really get to know any of these characters. It's just we get a message from 116 and it informs the crew what's going on the planet, that there's these two factions that are fighting each other over this. And it's just kind of lets you know what's going on the planet without spending time setting it up and then just abandoning it. Yeah, because 116 is this, maintenance module that is the artificial intelligence that has been there for eons. We honestly don't really get an idea of how long, but it's been quite a long time. And they're connected with the same creators who created the Brahma Shiva probe that we had, like we said, in Seize the Fire. And they end up needing Tuvok and White Blue, this three-way mind meld, to get the information they need to be able to fix themselves, because they've been broken for so many years, and they need that information to be able to fully repair themselves and be able to continue to keep these people out of danger. And so this part of the story really plays into Tuvok wrestling with what to do with this knowledge, And to me, that was the most interesting thing about it, because his wife tells him, you're withholding this, eco-sculpting knowledge. Are you not demonstrating the same quote-unquote wisdom that caused Andor to leave the Federation? And that's where also that fear comes in. Tuvok has the fear because he's seen this type of information, obviously from his days on the Excelsior with the Genesis Project. He's seen it go very wrong, and that's what he fears, is that humanity and the Federation will, and as a whole, will not deal wisely with this. And that's where the fear and trust all come in. And that's what made that part of the story really, really work as well, because all the themes were really coming together.
Yeah, I really like this part of the story. I love the fact that Tuvok is struggling with, do I divulge this information? Do I tell the Federation what I know, or do I not? And he pretends that he doesn't have it. And only his wife sees through that he still carries that information, that he has retained it. And White Blue is deactivated. White Blue, they're trying to get through to White Blue and can't, and hoping to also gather that information. But to Tuvok's point, this could be very instrumental in helping to revive these planets that were devastated by the Borg. But at the same time, this could be used as a weapon. Of course, we're going back to the Genesis device, and how that was the same type of situation. This could revive planets, or it could be used as a weapon. And he doesn't know if he should even... I don't think he even wants this information anymore, because he doesn't know what he really should do with it. I mean, in some ways, it kind of becomes a cop-out when we get to the end, that the information is then removed from him, and so now he doesn't have to worry about it. In some ways, I'd like to see him always carry this for a while and deal with this a little more. But it did make the story interesting to see him struggle with that fear. And also, he's doing the same things that the Federation did to the Andorians, right? It's it's always to protect, but then also harms.
Right.
You know?
I thought it was great because you mentioned you didn't like that it felt like a cop-out that's taken away, but it also kind of felt like they had taken away a big easy button from being able to just reset the universe. They can't bring all the people back, but they could restore the planets that the Borg had destroyed. And in some ways, you're kind of taking away the consequences of the aftermath of the whole Destiny trilogy, right? Part of that was kind of making the Federation in a way of having to really deal with something terrible. And at the same time, I think that it plays as a lesson to Tuvok. Tuvok didn't trust enough. He didn't trust his friends. He didn't trust the Federation that he's spent his life, serving. And I think that that's a lesson for him to begin to trust more. That because he knows the answer. Remember, they gave him the answer. They gave him a brief glimpse of how it could have been used amazingly, and then it's gone. And so he's now haunted by having made the wrong choice. He's haunted now by knowing that he did make the wrong choice. And so I think it will hopefully serve as a lesson to Tuvok in the future. In many ways, that choice is a godlike choice. I'm going to choose to, quote unquote, protect you because you can't choose the right thing to do with this information. And that is a very godlike type choice to make. And is it really our choice to do that? I don't know. I think it's a really great question.
I don't know if any choice he makes would be right or wrong. And any choice he does make is almost godlike because he's holding on to such big power, the big knowledge. Yeah. And
it's that idea of that a tool is neither evil nor bad. It's just what you do with it, Yes. And that's the same thing with this knowledge. It's not good or bad. It's just what the Federation would choose to do with it. And he's not trusting that the Federation itself would choose to do right by it.
But that's the problem, because the Federation are multiple individuals.
Right.
So you never know who's going to get hold of that information.
Yep. That's the fear.
Right.
And that's where it all comes in, like the fear and the trust and all of this. And so again, I think the fact that there are no easy answers is what makes this whole part of the story and this whole area of the story really work. And so, yeah, I really liked the way that this played in with the other themes. I think that this is the place where the story can really shines. So Riker is told that the Capital Line is going to come, which is a Vesta class starship. So they're going to, they got Slipstream. They're going to catch up with it, Titan, and take the Andorians back. And so they're expecting that to be the ship that shows up. And what really shows up first, and surprises everyone, is an Andorian ship. And apparently the Andorian and / Tholians are working together on this plan to be able to capture the population in a very tricky transporter accident. Let's make copies of people so we can solve the problem. And at the same time, we get the sense that the Tholians have a way of being able to maybe control the Andorians, or make these Andorians that would be made as copies more amenable to staying, even if they didn't want to in the first place. So what did you think of all of this?
I think this is, gosh, I don't even know. I don't think this was as compelling as the other storylines that we were just talking about, but I also found it to be a bit fun. And in a sense, it's a little silly. And I don't really understand why the Tholians are doing this, why the Tholians would want to help the Andorians in this way, why they would want to duplicate Andorians. Is it because they feel like maybe they can manipulate the duplicates better and then gain more power with using duplicates to help move the Andorians in the direction they want them to move in? And now, it just as you were talking through that, makes me wonder if all these members of this ship are actually all duplicates.
Mm-hmm.
And because we know that the crew that they were bringing over from the Titan, they made duplicates of, which, by the way, as I was reading it, there were some things that were confusing, where I was like, wait, I thought this person left the ship. Why are they still there? Wait, what's going on? I was like, am I confused or something going on? I was like, I better keep reading. And then I loved finding out, oh, they were duplicating the crew members. Okay, now this makes sense. But I don't know what the Tholians really expect to get out of this.
Mm-hmm. See, I 100% agree, and I think the thought process that I got was that the Tholians are going to be able to control, and are kind of in the background controlling the Andorian situation much more than we realize. That's where I kind of come with this. I do think that I talked about earlier my frustrations with the story and some confusion in the writing of the story. This was another area of the story that I didn't think was very well written, and like you said, kind of there was some confusion in what's going on, and it's a little bit more clear, I guess, maybe by the end, but it was still more confusing than it needed to be in the way that it was written. And so I didn't love it, and I didn't feel like there was I guess if I can't remember how this is picked up in the rest of the series of books. So I'm not going to judge it too harshly because it does feel like set up for more stories. But with everything that was going on here, it was another part of the book where I just felt like unfulfilled when I even got the answer as to what happened.
Yeah, I would say, though, my favorite aspect throughout the storyline was Pava, the Andorian officer.
Yeah.
I enjoyed her character, but to your point, there was things that were confusing because she's on the ship, then she leaves the ship, but then she's still on the ship, and there's others on the ship, even though they can only bring one Andorian at a time. And I was like, well, why is Riker allowing there to be more than one Andorian on the ship if he said he was only going to send one at a time, one returns, and then he sends another? And so, yeah, there was a bit of confusion, and I kept thinking, am I missing something? And I'm getting something wrong. And then I started thinking in my head, okay, maybe there is some payoff at the end. And then I thought, if there isn't, I'll have to go back and reread some of this that I'm misunderstanding. So to your point, I didn't really like the fact that I was getting confused like that, but I did like the Pava character. I was kind of enjoying her. So that helped me through that storyline. And then when the reveal came at the end about the duplicates, I'm like, oh, so it's not me just being an idiot. It's the fact that I was supposed to be confused. So I kind of liked it. It didn't bother me, but it was it was the storyline I was less interested in, but she was probably the character I was most favoring. Like, I really enjoyed her character.
Yeah. No, I did too. And I absolutely, I think that's one of the things where I anything right now with the story that had to do with the Andorians, I was more interested in than anything else. It was frustrating that this part of the story became less enjoyable because of kind of the confusing way in which it was written. And that I think that's my disappointment in it, because it's just not as clear, and I don't know how you do it to make it more clear, and like you said, it does feel a little bit silly and strange, and so again, I won't judge it too harshly because I can't remember if it does have a good payoff later on.
I don't.
So I might. Either. Yeah, and so as we talk through the rest of the 21st century books, as we kind of get through the ones we haven't talked about yet, I'm going to be interested to see if we actually have any real payoff to this, or if it's just something that gets swept under the rug. And if that's the case, I'll be kind of frustrated even more so with this book later on. But I don't know. It makes me wonder then, Bruce, where you kind of are with the ratings for Fallen Gods.
I am so glad we read this book, because when I went to get it off my shelf, it wasn't there. And then I went to pull my ebook version and it wasn't there. And then I realized that I've never read this book, and I thought I had. I thought I've read every Titan book, and I realized I somehow skipped this one and I never read it. And I'm glad now I can say I know I've read all the rest. But yeah, so this book, as to your point, I like the Andorian storyline, would have liked more of it, but I think we're going to get more of it when we get into the other books. I did enjoy the 116 character and the whole relationship with Tuvok and White Blue. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of White Blue because White Blue is kind of out of it, but is deactivated. But the Tuvok storyline was very interesting to me, and what he has to decide what he's going to do with that information. And it's that information that attracted 116 to reach out to him and do this mind meld with him and White Blue, that knowledge. And to your point, fear and mistrust is woven throughout this whole novel. And then the storyline with Pava and the Andorians on the ship was a little weird, a little confusing. The villain on that ship, the captain, was just, a very basic villain, nothing much to him. But, overall, I enjoyed it, and I'm glad I got to read it. So I've finally finished off the Titan books. So I'll give this book 1 out of 6. So that's 5 out of 6.
Wow, that's a pretty good rating, Bruce. Goodness. I read this book before when it, came out, and I rereading it again, and I like some of it, and I dislike some of it as well. And so it's kind of a mixed bag for me personally. And I would say that it's probably just over average for me, in the sense that I would probably give this like 2.75 out of 5. And partially that's the case because there's just too much of the book that doesn't work well enough. It was close, but no cigar in that sense. And I really wish that the themes we had dealt with were just played out over all of the stories better. And it's really the story on the planet that just leaves me completely flat. Like I don't respond to it at all. And so, yeah, I wish it would have been different. But, all in all, I'm glad that we reread it. And it is fun to just even see, even though this isn't a Typhon Pact series book, we connected to the next story perfectly. Like we really played out, the repercussions of that. I loved seeing that fall out. So that was really cool.
I'm so glad we're going back and rereading. Well, first time me reading this one, but rereading all these books in the 24th century. And it's so odd that I can't remember all the books that we, previously read and what happens in these stories. I remember vaguely some things. So I'm curious to see how this plays out in the next books. Yeah,
me too. When it comes to that, Bruce, I was going to let people know kind of where we are in the series. So we have gotten through Fallen Gods. The next book in this series that we're doing is The Struggle Within. That's a Typhon Pact novel book. And then we're going to read the next Typhon Pact books after that with Plagues of Night, Raise the Dawn, and Brinkmanship. And honestly, that'll be all of the series we've covered. The rest of the books we've already covered before throughout Literary Trek's run here, which is fantastic. So we're kind of completed the full version. Now, I'm sure there's people wondering, there's one book in there that we're not going to cover, and it's Indistinguishable from Magic. And I'm just going to be honest. That might be one of the worst Star Trek books I've ever read. I remember reading it the first time, and I hated it so much, I just never wanted to read it again. So I apologize to anybody who wanted us to cover that one, but that's why we're not going to cover that one.
I don't remember all the details of that one, but I remember thinking it was a little odd. And when I saw that we were coming up on it, I was like, I wonder if I'll like it better if I reread it. But I'm not that anxious to reread it, so I'm good with that.
Maybe one day when we've run out of other things to cover, that's what we'll cover. But Bruce, again, it's always fun when we're doing this. Like you said, I'm enjoying rereading this part of the series, and it's really kind of fun to be here because, we're right next to Coda. Coda is about to begin, and so it's not a bad place to be in this series of books. But when you're not here on Literary Treks, where else can people find you?
Well, I'm also on Positively Trek with Dan Gunther, who, of course, used to be part of the show. And we talk everything Star Trek, from episodes to movies to comics to books to news. You name it. We'll talk about it. And also on Star Wars Report, we're wrapping up the final year of Star Wars Report, which I guess it will be May when we do the last episode. I don't know when we're recording episodes. I just get a text from Riley and all of a sudden I'm on the show. And I don't know what's going on. Anyway, then you can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex.
And of course, you could find me here on the network doing the 602 Club, which is our general geek show, talking about all the fandoms outside of Star Trek that we love. There's so much to talk there. And of course, we've got Snyder Cuts in that feed as well. And then as we're recording this, we'll have soon coming out in October, Assembling Avengers, where John Mills and I are going to walk through and kind of evaluate the MCU from start to finish. You can also find me doing The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We've got a surprise coming up for you soon as well, so look out for that, starting here at the end of September. And you can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing two shows. One is Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, where we talked through every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then you can find me doing Aggressive Negotiations with the aforementioned John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But want to thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
You call that light reading? To each his own, number one.